So hi everyone, happy Wednesday. My name is Yo-Yo Eto and I work on the Blueprint Career Services team here at the School of Continuing Studies. I have the pleasure and the privilege to host this Blueprint Career Services Industry Insights conversation today, where I'll be talking with our panelists about trends in the biotech industry, their personal experiences working in the industry, and to gather some insights and advice for you to use in your own career journeys, your own navigation. So for those of you who don't know, or if this is your first time attending one of our sessions, Blueprint Career Services is a newer offering here at the school, created to work alongside you as you design a clear path to the future you envision for your career journey, wherever that might take you. So this offering provides diverse programming ranging from panel sessions, such as this one today, to cohort-based sessions, to strengths-based coaching. And we also have an online portal called the Blueprint Portal, which is probably how you found out about this event here, with articles and templates to tackle the practical aspects of your career development. So if you haven't already created an account on Blueprint Portal, you can do that, and we'll continue to add more resources, events, and updates into what's going on with us. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And I would also like to acknowledge that because this is online, you're probably joining us from many different places, near and far, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. So it's now my pleasure to welcome our panelists for today. I'm going to read out their bios and then I'll ask them to turn on their videos just so you can see them as we have conversations. So today I'm here with Daryl Vaz, Grace Thamaraja, Julie Shi, and Sharik Mujib. So I'll do a quick overview of their bios so we can get a feel for who we're going to be talking to today and then take it from there. So Daryl is president and CEO of Medcom Health Incorporated, an independent, fully integrated healthcare communications agency based in Guelph. Daryl has led numerous product launches in general pharmaceuticals and specialty fields, moderated KOL advisory meetings across multiple therapeutic areas, and facilitated rep training programs for multinational pharmaceutical clients. Before assuming his role, Daryl operated as the business development director and medical director of Antibody Healthcare Communications. Daryl holds 3 degrees from McMaster University in Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biology, a Master of Science in Medical Science, and an MBA in Strategic Business Valuation. So I'm looking forward to chatting more with you, Daryl. I'll move on to Grace. Grace discovered her passion for science during an undergraduate research project, which eventually led her to a PhD in medical genetics. She's inspired by scientific discovery, but wanted an alternative to traditional careers in research. After finishing graduate school, she found herself at an early stage startup that was developing microfluidic instruments for nanoparticle manufacturing. During her time at Precision Nanosystems, she discovered product management and went on to be a product manager at Stem Cell Technologies and Natera. Product management has allowed her to build tools and processes to support scientists and clinicians over the years while working with amazingly diverse teams. So thank you, Grace. I'm excited to also hear about your story and chat a little bit more. So Julie next. Julie Shi is an associate director in cell therapy development at Bristol Myers Squibb in Seattle, Washington, where she leads a multidisciplinary team focused on developing non-viral gene delivery technologies for the cell therapy drug product process. She received her Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering at MIT and then completed her PhD in Bioengineering at the University of Washington, focused on developing and characterizing synthetic nanoparticles for non-viral gene delivery. She also actually did a short postdoc at U of T before returning to Seattle to join a cell therapy startup company, Juno Therapeutics, which was then acquired a couple times and is now BMS. And last but not least, Sharik. Sharik is an oncology medical science liaison at Takeda, where he supports therapies in lung cancer and myeloma. Additionally, part of his role is identifying and establishing sites for clinical trials across Ontario, bringing novel drugs to cancer patients. So prior to his role, Sharik was an R&D scientist at Fluidgem, developing regions for mass cytometry and enabling users to conduct single cell analysis in blood and various tissues for cancers and infectious diseases such as COVID-19. Shark also has a doctorate from the Institute of Medical Science of U of T, studying HIV immunology, and leverages his expertise of human immunology to ultimately advance patient outcomes and care. So in reading those and in getting to understand your bios, I'm really excited to dive into the conversation. I prepared some questions ahead of time for our panelists today. To begin the conversation. And you'll see on your screen, there is a Q&A function where you can type in your questions if you do have them. So if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to type them in. We'll also try out allowing you to unmute yourself. So if you have a question and you don't want to type it, but you want to say it on the mic, just raise your hand during our Q&A portion later on. And so I'll allow time at the end of the moderated questions, the questions I prepared, for you to ask your own questions. So start to think about any questions that might come up for you as we have this discussion. So I will ask the panelists right now to turn their videos on so we can see you, and then we'll turn the slide deck off. Perfect. All right. So we heard in your bios what you currently do. Is this what you always wanted to do? And how did you determine this was the direction you wanted to go? I'll start with Daryl. Your mic is already unmuted, so I'll start with you.
I pay the price for that. So I don't know what anyone else will say here, but I think you're extremely lucky and brilliant if you do in your life what you always thought you were meant to do. I know this is certainly not what I ever thought. I thought I was going to, well, first be a doctor, then be a researcher, then be a pharmaceutical sales rep. And I thought, you know, kind of cool being on the road. And I never thought that my life would get to a point where essentially now I run a business that operates in the pharmaceutical industry, but for the most part, I don't actually lean on the science that much. I lean probably more on everything I took away from my MBA. And I used to make fun of the business, my friends in university who were in business school, and be like, oh, that's boring stuff. You know, why don't you do something really important for the world? And here I am just running a business. So no, never predicted it. And I think that's what makes it fun.
What would you say got you in this direction? How did you determine that that was the direction you did want to go?
Just observing the people around me. And so I think just not sort of operating with my head down and doing the tasks that were set to me in my role, but looking at what people are doing around me and seeing, would I enjoy it or not? And then not, I guess, sitting back and waiting for an opportunity to be given that role. But I've pretty much written my own job description at every stage of my career and just told my boss, hey, I think I can do this.
Right.
And that's kind of what's allowed me to move on.
So it sounds like it does require a level of self-awareness and knowing what you like, knowing what you're strong in, things like that.
For sure. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? I will go to Julie.
I probably fall on the opposite side of that spectrum. I always wanted to stay close to the science, and so and I think I'm one of the very few people who work in a field where she did her undergraduate and graduate school research, and so so I did always want to be in research. I'm in development, but working closer to the preclinical side of things, so very research oriented. But I have tried other things because I thought I should expand my, I guess, knowledge base. But I always come back to this field, and it's an exciting field, and so I'm still here.
so some version of enjoyment, I'm hoping.
Oh, of course.
Yes. I did say, it's like, you must be brilliant if you can figure out that what you want to do from here. So you must be brilliant, Julie, because you knew. Right.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I think I got lucky. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I think I kind of tripped as well. There's one other career before everything that Daryl described. Was I wanted to be an FBI agent because I watched X-Files a lot when I was a kid. But yeah, as life kind of, went through, it was the same kind of route, medical doctor. And then, I did an undergrad thesis project in first year, which got me into sort of pipetting and touching like lab things. And I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. And sort of transitioned into that, and then went the grad school route. I think the business transition that's organically taken place without really any formal education, has really just happened on the job. I think if you go, one of the things about product management is you get to see every facet of the company, and you kind of get to touch it too, everything from sales all the way to R&D. And so I always tell people it's a great way to enter your career, because you can figure out maybe what you like to do and sort of lean into that a little bit and have kind of an entry point at a company that supports you. In my case, I was at a startup and we just had to do everything and anything, from sweeping the floor when the VCs came in all the way up to presenting to the CEO of Pfizer, right? So everything was in there. And I just had support from the first person who hired me, who was one of the co-founders, who sort of decided that I needed to do product management, and I trusted him. And so that's where we ended up. I think for me, it was, a lot of it is a bit of luck and having good mentors who sort of paved the way for me.
Yeah, the mentorship piece is pretty important. I know I'm going to talk a little bit about networking and the people in your networks, but it does sound like that mentorship piece too. Sometimes people can see in you what you might not necessarily have thought, or they can support you along that way. Nice. And last but not least, Shark.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to U of T Continuing Education and Yo-Yo for the invite here. It's great to be on this panel and be on the other side of where I've often sat in some of these discussions. I'd say I'm probably somewhere between all three of what the panelists said. I agree with Daryl. No one kind of, has like a bullseye in mind and ends up exactly there, including Julie said that, she tried different things. I'd say I knew I wanted to be in this field. So what I do now is basically scientific communication, talk about science with the people who are gonna, use it, use the products, use the drugs. And that's where I always wanted to be. I think that ties my research aspect, very passionate researcher, otherwise you don't go pursue PhDs. So, definitely went in with that and wanted to always develop things. But the other side of it, which was the application, was kind of missing for me in the lab. So that's why I wanted to transition to industry. And so that's why I think that I'm somewhere in the middle of where I always wanted to be. I did stumble into some things just like everyone else said, but ultimately I do think I am where I want to be, and I'm doing the stuff that I kind of always was pursuing a degree in science for. So that's what matters to me. How I got here is going to be different. We're probably going to learn about that for each one of our panelists as we talk more. But yeah, no one's got a linear pathway, but here we are.
Yeah, it's so funny because people assume, oh, go ahead, Daryl, go ahead.
I was going to say, I like the theme of luck that a few people mentioned, though. I neglected to say that, but yeah, it's a whole lot of luck too, and timing.
Yeah, people often assume that it's linear. I want to go from A to B to Z or whatever, and then boom, you reach B, and you might have to change your plans, or you might have to go back to A and things like that, and a little bit of luck too. So most times when I talk to people, their careers are not linear. They're very much a lot of self-discovery, assessment, and things of that nature. So based on your experience in the industry, your work that you do, what are some key trends you've noticed that you think attendees might be interested in knowing more about or should be aware of? And anyone can go first.
Well, I mean, I just jump in and say that, I happen to be an MSL for oncology, and, in the last decade or so, oncology has probably been, if not the fastest, paced industry. It's definitely right up there. So there's so much change that keeps coming all the time. But one thing that I learned is, even though this might be relevant for some of the students out there, and maybe Julie would agree as well, is that, even though I studied HIV immunology, I figured out how the transition to oncology worked really well. So it's just about knowing, for example, immunology and being able to apply it. So I'd say that in terms of trends, try to see connections, even though don't get overwhelmed with things that you're going to see, because, we're talking about ChatGPT now in the world and everything, and how it's going to revolutionize everything. You just got to kind of figure out how what you already know can intersect with all the new trends coming up. Data is just going to keep coming up at an even more fervent pace than it ever has before. But don't be intimidated by it. Kind of try to see that, what kind of things you have right now that already fit what's going to be a part of that new world that's coming up in the coming months.
I'll speak. Well, maybe I shouldn't speak to the science and the pipeline of products, because I think I'm the only one on this panel without a PhD here. So I'll leave that to the folks at the PhD to speak to. But it's exciting times there, I think, because honestly, I feel like I've been in the industry less than 20 years. But in that time, there's less big blockbusters coming out, in terms of products. And so certainly shifting a whole lot more to biotech and people looking at rare diseases and other areas where they haven't in the past. And I find that exciting because you can really feel connected to a cause. If you're there supporting the next big hypertension drug or something, it's a massive issue. There's all these players. It kind of gets lost in this big world. But when you're trying to support, a very small rare disease, you can really get connected to it. So that's something I think that's exciting. I would say that just the other trend is specialization. So a lot of questions we get asked, quite frankly, from people who we hire. They say, well, why don't clients just do what we do themselves? Why do they hire us to do it for them? Why can't they just do it themselves? And because what we do is so specialized. There's just, they can do it. It's not rocket science, but we do it hundreds to thousands of times a year, and they would be doing it 3 to 4 times a year. So clearly we have more expertise in doing it. So finding your niche that you're kind of passionate or good about, I think that's becoming more and more because people are outsourcing to agencies or things like that. And so seeing that even at the biotech level, where it used to be, Grace mentioned, I'm doing everything from sweeping to presenting to the VCs, et cetera. It used to be you got to kind of handle it all. I think people are seeing value in going to the experts for certain things.
Got it. Yeah.
It's more of a networked world, so it's easier to do that. Yeah.
So like the global nature of the world makes it when you say networked world.
Well, no, when world, I didn't mean global. I just meant our world. Like you can Google and find someone to support you with something, whereas before I don't even know how to find someone to support me on this, so I have to do it myself. Right?
Got it.
Whereas now you can find a specialized support or consultant to bring in or whatever it is. So there's all these roles that are opening up that are being valued.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
I was gonna let Julie go, but I don't know if she has anything to say there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, so I came from the kind of this delivery scientist space, which when I was graduated from my PhD program, no one was really interested in, and now it's been a huge thing in the field. And I kind of wandered into this field of cell therapy, and when I wandered into it, it was kind of exciting, but no one knew if it was going to work. And now it's a thing. So it's been really exciting to be part of those journeys and seeing. There's just been an explosion of science in the past few years, from gene editing to cell therapy to vaccine and delivery. And so I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's I think it's been interesting to see the trends going through. But yeah, finding your niche, I think, has been really helpful in navigating the tremendous amount of science that's been going on, and can, as I think Daryl said and Trig said, kind of being observant, I think is the best way to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think to add to sort of what Julie was saying there, the reason I wanted her to go first is because I think she's in a really cool space that's very much up and coming, and she got in there earlier than anybody else probably did. So it's interesting to watch some of these spaces grow. And what I see typically, so I don't do kind of what Shriek and Daryl do. So I'm in the tools and technology side of things. I'm really looking to provide scientists with things to make their lives easier, right? Which is a little bit different than what the other two gentlemen are in the space of. And so Julie would be one of my customers, right? At the end of the day. So what I'm seeing kind of with her group of people is in terms of like, she has that specialty, but what is really getting layered on top is software automation and high throughputness. I think that's like a huge part that I'm starting to see for folks who are on the ground as researchers and scientists trying to make new discoveries, is that, they're being asked to do a lot more with less resources and a shorter period of time. And that's just the way kind of the knowledge exponential graph is happening. And so that's one of the things I think about when I'm picking my next technology to support, is what's going to be that future support of automation, software support and really concept of high throughputness. So pipetting one at a time is not going to work anymore, right? And Julie pipetting is not going to work anymore. And so that's really what I look into for those types of like really obvious, I think I would say, market trends when you're looking to find employment. I think I would play in those spaces because I think those spaces are not going anywhere. They're here to stay. From sort of a product management perspective, I think the trends are really people management and kind of higher level of EQ. So, you know, it's not necessarily about my technical skills anymore. Even when I hire product managers under me, I hire folks that I know can learn, like kind of Shariq was saying, you can apply your PhD in different ways to all sorts of industries, because the whole point of your PhD was to be independent and learn, right? And so you can do that across different spaces. But I think the thing that you can't learn as quickly is that EQ portion and that people management portion. And really in product management, the whole concept is that you're influencing folks who don't report directly into you. So it's really challenging if you don't know how to, you know, manage people in a way that is clear to a software engineer versus a salesperson. Those are very two different personalities, right? And so that's kind of what I see as trends that are more technical and soft skills that I'm seeing in industry right now.
Got it. Yeah, so some of those skills you're actually talking about, like beyond even biotech, one of the trends or things that came out during the pandemic, especially, was the importance of some of those softer skills or transferable skills, regardless of where you are, because it allows you to be agile, right? And kind of move around, which is helpful for the trends. And so I guess my follow-up question is, within your, and this is for anybody to answer as well, but like in the work that you do, in your experience in the industry, what are misconceptions that you've come across, and how do you navigate those misconceptions? Yeah, I'll go from there.
Well, I mean, I'll go first. So I run a healthcare communications agency. We are in support of the pharmaceutical industry. So pharmaceutical companies, large and small, hire us to do everything from running advisory board meetings, like focus groups with physicians, or producing medical education programs, or, you know, producing publications that kind of espouse the message that they're trying to spread about their product that's just launched or maybe been in the market for a while. And I think a misconception is, you know, because they're the customer, they're the client, and we're the agency, misconception is that they're the expert and we're in support of them. And as I just mentioned earlier, I think it's something that people who've worked with us for about 5 years realize very quickly. We probably know more about doing our client's job than our clients do, because we've seen it hundreds and thousands of times, you know, more than they have. Someone in that world might, you know, run 5 products in their career. We run like 500 a year. So, you know, it's having confidence, I think, in being a strategic partner, and realizing that even though you might not be working for a company that has the big name, you are a strategic expert and you can provide value to those companies and you can feel reward from it. I think as you're looking at careers, I think that's maybe a misconception how people look at it. You don't have to work for a company where you say the company name, everyone knows who you work for. It can be just as important, even if it's not.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah, I think I'd just take on, sorry, Julie.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to pick up from where Daryl left, and this is kind of echoing what he said in the first half as well, was that, you know, you don't have to always reinvent the wheel, because, you know, the experts exist, and, you know, that's why it's very important for you to identify who you can combine with to actually deliver at something better. But because Daryl mentioned pharma and I happen to work in pharma, I would just, you know, this is a big misconception about pharma, in my opinion. Of course, the guy who works for pharma is going to say this is, and I think it's changed. But even when I joined grad school, like even, or let's say like 15, 20 years ago, pharma was always referred to as, you know, the dark side, as like, you know, the evil side. And, you know, I wouldn't say everything's perfect, but I think that people are slowly starting to come around to the fact that, you know, a lot of the innovation and a lot in medicine and all the clinical trials are also driven by pharma. And, you know, in fact, without pharma, you wouldn't have these fantastic patients surviving cancer for 10 plus years, or some other, you know, diabetes. I know that was a long drug like, long ago, but still there's so many examples of that. Like HIV is one of them, where, people live normal lives now, and, all these advances are constantly changing, and pharma is the one that brings out these to the clinic. So I think, that misconception's changing, but, it's not all evil. There's people on the other side who really want to benefit patients as well. And that's what they're working towards. Go ahead, Julie. Sorry, I cut you off before.
Oh, no, that's fine. No, that's a good point. So I think transitioning from kind of the startup to now big pharma life, there's a misconception coming from academia that you don't do anything interesting in industry. And I have to say, like, cell therapy was completely new to me. And a lot of the scientific advancements that we've made while I've been on this kind of journey from Juno to BMS, have really been driving that science forward. And those aren't problems that you solve in academia. They're not resourced to do that kind of work. It's really geared towards how do you make a drug product that is very complicated. It's for cell therapy, we take T cells from a patient, re-engineer them to express this kind of signals that will kill cancer cells, and then reinfuse those T cells back into the patient. So it's very laborious, very manual, and a lot of innovation on how to actually manufacture that product has to happen in a company. And so there's a lot of interesting science. You learn a lot about what it actually takes to get an idea that came from a lab at, say, like a university, and really drive it into a drug product and commercialize that drug product. And it's a lot of work and takes a lot of money and resources. So that's a common misconception that we don't do any interesting science, but I really enjoyed it.
It does all, and you're right. I think sometimes even with the idea of interesting things versus not interesting things, sometimes it's a matter of interest, but understanding. And so even in just hearing the different ways you've all engaged in this, there's so many interesting things that have even come out from just listening to that. And one of the things I actually noticed when I was talking to, and just in preparing for today, and I don't know if it's a misconception or a trend or something that's happening, there seems to be a lot of mergers, acquisitions, startup culture. Is it an aspect of the industry of biotech that's commonplace? Is it new? Is it useful information? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think I can hit this a little bit since I'm in this pretty extensively. So I think a lot of the startup culture started with Silicon Valley transitioning from tech to biotech in their investments, and not just Silicon Valley, but also like in Boston and other areas. Fundamentally, a lot of the startups that are in even Vancouver or Toronto actually got money from the US, right? And so I think this is a more recent trend. I mean, recent compared to like decades before. I would say it's not recent for our lifetime, of course. This is very normal practice for us. So what is really happening is those VCs are investing in startups that have some really specific technology, like Julie coming out of Juno, that type of thing. It's not just VCs, right? There's also academic institutes that are doing it as well. So U of T and UBC all have incubator spaces, right? Where companies can grow a little bit and then they get their investment from outside VCs and then they continue to sort of grow. Obviously, at some point or another, there has to be an exit strategy. Either you IPO and you become a full-fledged company, or you have to sell or be acquired, right? And those are kind of the two systems that I think most companies set up for. The majority of them don't really get that opportunity to IPO because they're so specific in the technology they're trying to develop that they're fundamentally have to be acquired. And I think pharma has put out a lot of reports. I mean, even more recently, I think it was AstraZeneca and others who've said, hey, I'm going to spend more time acquiring because right now the economy is tight and it's easier for me to acquire than to actually develop something brand new. And so then you get these acquisitions going into larger companies and getting kind of molded into their fold and being part of a larger program, right? Like BioNTech could have never done what it did had it not been for Pfizer, right? Moderna is a little bit different. They're standing on their own 2 feet, right? And that's a perfect example of how the COVID vaccine could be developed in 2 different aspects. And so I think that's what we're seeing. I think that's going to continue fundamentally, because even right now, as I talk to VCs, they're sitting on money. They're just being careful because of the economy, but they have a ton of money. They're just waiting to invest. And now I think people are just being a little bit more careful. I think people kind of sprayed and prayed during the bubble just because there was so much excitement about biotech during COVID. And now they're stepping back and they're saying, okay, let's make more careful investments. So I think this is going to be sort of a way of the future.
Got it.
Yeah, and I can build on that. So having been at a startup, which was pretty large and had IPO by the time I already started there, and then being as part of a large pharma, I've seen this from both sides. I think smaller biotechs and startup companies are very nimble and can do a lot of things much faster than a pharma company. But a pharma company, is really interested in commercializing drug products, and that requires a completely different skill set that's not conducive to building new technologies or doing kind of these internal research programs from scratch. So there's a lot of partnerships that happen between startups and large pharma. There's a lot of these mergers and acquisitions if the technologies are promising enough. And so, yeah, I think every pharma has its own approach to partnership or acquisition, but I think BMS probably leans very heavily on partnership.
I think the advice coming out of that then for people, as we're talking about from a career standpoint, is don't undervalue even the smallest company that seems to just be starting up and has no name like that. Don't just apply to companies you might want to apply to companies you don't know, just because the role makes sense, because eventually they're good companies. They're all going to grow, they're going to be acquired, or they're going to be a part of something larger, and you go with it.
Yeah, and that's a good point to mention there.
And you can bring expertise that they might not have, right? Which is, I think, really cool, because you're not going into a big company that maybe has a lot of that expertise covered. You can really sort of help propel the company in a direction with what you might not even value as your own expertise, right? So I think it's very cool. I'm biased. I've been in startup most of my time here, so.
Yeah, and a lot of growth can come from that too. Yeah. So as you
I thought I would just add one comment.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the only thing I wanted to say was, I do agree with what Daryl said, is that, don't limit yourself to who you're going to apply for. And it was kind of said by everyone. The key is that for you, it shouldn't matter. Mergers and acquisitions are a way of life. That's how Microsoft grew, right? Every company's grown by, taking technology that it needs to and kind of cannibalizes it or licenses it or something. Just to put a number for everyone. So pharma takes at least $1 billion to bring a drug to the market, right? Small startup does not have that kind of money. And, so you got to go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, get through all that stuff. It takes a lot of money to kind of get there. So, ultimately these mergers and acquisitions, drive the industry. It's not bad. It's actually good.
So it's a sign of growth and development and all of those kinds of things, right? Yeah.
It is. And that is definitely the model kind of going forward, I'd say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, and this was actually leading to the question I had around just the skills that you need to be able to transfer it to wherever it is that you're going. So some of the things that have already come out is it's important to know what your skills are, what your strengths are, what you're interested in, and the importance of transferable skills, continuing learning, all of those things continue to show up in the idea of career development and growth. How have you seen it play a role in your career? Are there any skills that you think people on this call should really take into consideration?
Well, I think very important to reiterate Grace's comment around, emotional quotient and then just sort of having your people skills kind of honed. And I think the only way you do that, quite frankly, is to get out there and work in different environments with different people and different structures of teams and figure it out and just be really critical and of yourself, and analytical of how you're doing and self-aware of the impact that you're having. I don't know if there's a course that can ever teach you that. It's just life skills. But that's important. Like we could have the best medical writer here who can just, pump out things, no problem. But if they just can't function within a team, and certainly if they can't manage people, that's going to limit their growth. They're only ever going to be able to produce for themselves. And we always say you grow in your career when you can amplify your effect through other people. And the way that you do that is by managing a team. So that's definitely huge. I would say just, from my experience, I was always science, always wanted to be a doctor, took science in high school, took a science undergrad, did a science master's, was on my way to do a PhD. And then I'm like, what the heck am I doing? I don't even know where I'm going with this. So I got out of the PhD, finished the master's, started working in the industry. And it only took me, I think, a year or two to realize, I actually like the business side of it more. And immediately, I did my MBA part-time, but immediately enrolled in that and sort of continued on. And it takes a while to finish, but you got to listen to that. I think what I hear a lot from people, at least, as people in the company or people who come for advice, is people want to feel like they can do something before they try and do it. So they want to feel like they're ready to do a role, and confident they can do it before they give it a shot. And man, that's really going to slow down your growth in life and the ceiling you're going to hit. Like, you got to have some confidence that if it's something you want to do, it doesn't mean you already know how to do it. It's just something you want to do. And then, give it a shot, go and enroll in the school, even though, like, I went and did my MBA, and I'm talking to people who came from business degrees and trying to figure out basic accounting. And I had no idea what the heck I was talking about, but you work your way through it. So pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, I think, is key. That would be the approach to continuing education, I think, to keep in mind.
So learning by doing and practice and experience.
Yeah.
And I think a question I'll add on to just the original question about skills as well is just, if there is someone struggling to figure out what skills, what relevant experience they should get, where would you say they would start? And I saw a question kind of come up in there in the chat as well, like, where do I even start in knowing the skills that I should be going for? So just going to throw that in there as well as you're answering your questions.
I find a really helpful way to do this is look through LinkedIn and see, look at people who have jobs that you're interested in and just kind of cold message them and ask if you can talk to them about their job. And usually people are really willing to chat with you. Surprising.
That's a
Yeah, I
good
would say like mentors as well, which is very similar to what Julie said, is just, find people like in your environment who have the job that you're interested in, and just learn more about it. I mean, there was a time in my career I was interested in what Shrik's doing with MSLing, and I just talked to a bunch of MSLs to find out what is that about, right? And most likely, like, if you're already in a biotech company and it's bigger, those people probably are in your company, which is even easier to access. But the LinkedIn thing is very key. Like, I would really urge people to not just like randomly add people, but actually put a message in. Because when you randomly add me, I don't know if you're trying to sell me something or what. And so I usually am more apprehensive. But if you actually do what Julie said, just like kind of send a message being like, I'm really interested in your career path. Would you have time to chat? I think most people are willing to sort of sit down and do that.
Yeah. That's a great point about including a note in the ad, actually, because there are times I'll get those similar things. Like, someone adds me on LinkedIn, and I just assume it's a mistake. I just showed up on their suggested list, and so they added me. But adding that note does give it a personalized touch. Yeah.
My only comment to, everyone's already summarized it really well. I think that the biggest key in your question there, Yo-Yo, and I know I understand it was hypothetical, but someone's identified what they want to do. I think that's the hardest part. I think you've identified with what you want to do. Clearly, you've got the passion to do it. It's something that drives you. Next comes the LinkedIn and these notes and everything. But now you've actually invested your critically appraised yourself and invested yourself in, this is a job I want to do. Honestly, that's the hardest part. Many times people think that they want to be CEOs of Tesla. They don't know what it takes to be a CEO of Tesla because they're seeing the guy tweet. But I think that if you've taken yourself through the process of like a role that you really like, then it's easier to identify what skills you would need for that role.
Right. So really starting with the self-understanding and then picking before you even going out to.
Yeah.
And this kind of came up in the questions that you were asking. I'm just going to let the audience know I have like 2 more questions, so you're welcome to throw in any questions you have. I've seen a few come in through the chat. You can put in the Q&A section, Q&A as well, if you have any questions for the panelists. But this came up a lot in what you've all talked about: networking, mentorship. How did this show up in your careers? And we've heard it, but how would people engage in authentic networking? A lot of things are virtual these days, and how do they navigate that authentically? How would you suggest they go about that?
Boy, I think you got to think back a little bit, because I think for most of us now, we're kind of maybe on the other side of that mentorship. So we're more approached to be the mentors, and you're kind of wondering how you give your time a little bit efficiently. I think the number one thing you hear when you talk about any sort of networking advice is it's got to be a mutually sort of beneficial relationship. And so in that example that Julie just talked about of how you approach someone, I think people accept to speak there because they kind of like talking about themselves. They kind of like feeling like they're the success story and someone else wants to emulate them. That's why people accept those and want to talk, right? They probably want to be of help too, but they don't mind doing it. There's not someone grilling them on, tell me, ask a straightforward question like, what program should I enroll in order to, advance my career? Well, that's not about me. That's all about you. So if you're just asking me that, no one's going to want to talk to you. You need to make it about, tell me about you, and then I'm going to have some follow-up questions from that. And okay, I struggle with this compared to, show that you're listening. I struggle with this compared to what, you just had. How could I overcome that? So I think that's how you form a bond to possibly get a mentor, as opposed to just someone you kind of network with and ask a few questions. I think for the most part, they've got to be someone who knows you well enough to be motivated to want to support you. And so I've been lucky. I think mentors have come out of the places I've worked. And actually, then it gets a little tricky as the higher up you get, then there's no one you work for anymore. I don't work for anyone right now. And so for a while, it's kind of like, well, where do I get more ideas from? Where do I get more motivation from? And then I joined a peer group of other business owners. And that's kind of now my mentor group. So you just gotta, again, got to be a little lucky to run into the right people, but look for people who know you really well. And if they don't know you really well, then you have to share enough and form that strong relationship where you are not just grilling with questions.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'll say that the first job might not be like what you want or what you love, right? Like that first role that you take on when you transition in. My first job at Precision Nanosystems was basically going around finding people like Julie, being like, please try these nanoparticles, I swear they work. And just like doing table shows and conferences. I was effectively sales because I was the 8th person at a startup, right? And so everyone was sales. The CEO was sales too. We all did that kind of, boots on the ground work. And I didn't enjoy it. So at least it taught me I didn't want to do sales longer term, but I did it for that time until we hired our VP of sales because it needed to be done, right? And so I think doing that type of stuff also, like Daryl said, it gives you mentors in your company who now can see you and have, something invested in you to help you succeed. And so they will help you also identify what skill sets you might have, what you're good at, and what you can naturally transition into as other roles, which is effectively what happened to me. I was more external facing when I started, and I became more internal facing as time went on, and helped with sort of product development, which is, I think, where my true passion lies, which I wouldn't have known had I not stuck it through for a couple, months to a year, just trying to prove myself during that time. And I think that's really important, just to do that. You don't know what you don't know yet, but also, like, putting yourself out there in spaces that you're uncomfortable in is okay, right?
And I think something that stood out to me too, like when you say the first role is an opportunity for you to try things out, because you might find out, something that you might not have thought about. And so seeing opportunities, even when you're not in the perfect, because that exists, perfect job, perfect role, but seeing the opportunities to work on other skills as well. And that allows for others to support you. Yeah.
My take on networking has always been possibly slightly controversial. Not quite. I mean, I do agree that, these LinkedIn chats and everything work because people like to talk about themselves and they do like to think they're the success story. But the network that's always worked for me is the people who I've actually worked with, right? And this doesn't mean always in a professional capacity. I've been an MSL for a year and a half. I got this role because of someone I met during my PhD in starting 2011. And, just stayed in touch with her. Of course, she's a good friend. But then, when the opportunity came up, she referred to me. She's been in industry for like 10 years or so. So I'm sure she was talking to a lot of people. But somehow when the opportunity came up and she knew I was interested, she wanted to refer to me, right? And that's because it's someone who I've worked with, and someone who then truly believes that I can kind of do the work, right? Because you get to know someone a lot better. So I would just say, of course, go out, do the LSCDS and all these networking opportunities. Add me onto LinkedIn after if you want to chat, that's fine. And we will, right? And I'll help you if I can. And I can't say I always will, but the key is always think about what your network really is. Your network is really the people you're working with today. If you're in school, if you're an undergrad, the person who you sit next to, that's going to be your network 10 years from now. If you're in grad school, that person who, is a grad student along with you, or you work within a lab or in some other lab, that's the person who's going to speak up for you when the opportunity arises, because, they've got someone. And so that's the real network to me, because that's just the way it's panned out for me. I'm not saying it doesn't work the other way. And I know this is getting a little long-winded, but for biotech, I think that this is important to realize. In science, I think that that's your true network. I know a lot of my friends in the financial sector, part of their job hiring process is to be put in a room with a bunch of candidates and then networking and see about who can get along with the most contacts at the end of the day. Science kind of doesn't work like that. I think science really works on word of mouth still, especially if you want to go into academia, and there's nothing wrong with going into academia. So just think about the people you're working with will be your real network. That's all I wanted to say there. Sorry.
Great point. Yeah, it's the people that've seen you do work, and they're already within your network. It's not a new network to form. It's just a connection. And I think that speaks to maybe some of what Daryl was saying, and Grace was saying, they've already seen you do work and they know you, and it's not just about you, it's about them too. Really good point. I have one more question, but I actually see a few things coming in. So I'm going to interrupt myself because some of the questions coming in are pretty good. So there's one that came in here. And Julie, I don't know, I didn't let you answer networking. Please go ahead and answer first, and then I'll look at this question that came in.
Oh, I think I went first.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All of it is just really good information that I'm just mixing it all. So the first question that came in here in the Q&A that I thought was interesting was, what are some of the biggest challenges you see in the biotech industry with regards to patients, practitioners, or insurance provision, and how might these translate into future opportunities?
I just start off with that. Do you want the long answer or the short answer? I think I'll tell you
The
from
best
Canadian.
answer.
Well, I'll tell you from the Canadian perspective, these things about patient and public funding are really more of a regulatory question. If I answer this from the farmer's perspective, just kind of going back to this misconception that I called it, that pharma's evil. Between the process that it takes for a drug to come into market and then get all the approvals and then get funding, most companies will run what's called a compassionate use program, right? It's more like we give the drug out for free for people who would technically benefit from this kind of drug. That's not to say that, you know, it stays free forever. There's obviously negotiations that happen, but a lot of that is bureaucratic, that happens behind the scenes. I would say that in terms of a challenge, at least in Canada, it's quite fragmented. Each province has its own negotiations for how they want to approach bringing a drug to the market. So you have like a Health Canada, which is like the universal body, then it trickles down into another body, and then individual provinces making decisions. This means that if a drug was approved by Health Canada, it'll take potentially, say, 6 months to come to Ontario. It could take 6 years to get to PEI. So these are challenges that are like much bigger than an individual company is probably the easiest way to say it. And I'll just let someone else take it on from here.
Yeah, I would say just so that's a very Canadian problem, obviously, with our ridiculous healthcare system. But I think the sort of growing challenge is that the incremental benefit of some of the products, like we've got some great pharmaceutical products out there and you know, therapeutics, the incremental benefit is getting harder to show, even if you look at areas like oncology, etc. And therefore, you know, enough to show where you're like, well, if that was me, I'd rather take this new drug because, you know, it's that much more of a benefit. But to prove that it's worth the cost is a lot harder, because there's like, well, we got this one that's kind of good enough and it's about, you know, 30% cheaper. And so it really is that good. Does the province need to fund this more expensive one? And so, you know, opportunities are certainly, if you're a math and economics whiz, but you can understand the science, like blending those two together, if that thrills you, I think there's a lot of conversations in, you know, health economics and outcomes and trying to sort of rationalize in black and white why someone should, a government or whatever, private payer, whoever, should pay for a new product. I think that's a skill set that doesn't necessarily exist as broadly as it should, and quite frankly isn't quite as crystallized in how you do that, right? We're still figuring it out.
So I think if you want to transition to like job specifically, instead of kind of having a philosophical chat about it, I would say in the US, market access folks are extremely in demand. So these are the folks who facilitate the reimbursement to insurers. So it's not like in Canada where it's an entire provincial or state body or an entire country body. It's individual insurers that you negotiate with to get the amount of reimbursement that you think is accurate. So I've worked quite extensively with these folks at Natera, and it is a hugely demanding job, and it's extremely, you know, I've met some of the smartest people in those roles, I would say. And they're just basically trying to figure out ways to get money for the test that is being performed in the case of Natera, and it would be the same for drugs. And so I think that's a pretty simple, like sort of one-to-one conversion of jobs that you can think about. It requires a great deal of experience, and I don't even know if there's like a course you can take. I think it's just something that happens on the job. And people like, you know, Sharik's role will transition into these types of things because they're touching doctors, they're learning quite a bit about clinical trials, so they're able to kind of talk the talk when it comes to negotiating with insurance providers. The other one I would say is quality. QA, so quality assurance, is another role that I see across, you know, research use only products, but also drug products and lab tests. That is a very valuable job that actually has courseware associated with it. So you can go to school to learn quality and sort of work up that ladder. And that has a pretty clear path. A lot of folks I've seen have always started in quality and just kind of continued up. So those are kind of two roles that I see are quote unquote solving some of the bigger challenges that I see in biotech from a patient practitioner perspective.
I will, and if nobody else has anything to add, another question came in. So it came into the chat, and just as a reminder, if anybody wants to ask their question using their mic, just use the raise hand function. You'll see it right on the bottom near chat. So if you would like to ask your question that way, you're also welcome to do so. I did see a question come in. I'm trying to scroll up to make sure I can find it. Sharik earlier talked about AI in biotech. Can you please talk more about AI in biotech?
Not really. I think AI is taking everyone by storm, and we're just learning all its capabilities. Tell you that I was at a conference this past week, and the presenters actually did put up like a chat GPT response, and they showed it to us live, and it's quite revolutionary how things are going. Maybe ask me in a little bit of time how AI is going to change biotech. But outside of these specific roles, though, I'll tell you that AI is going to be a fantastic tool for drug discovery. There are already people who are trying to use that to design new inhibitors and things like that. So I think that we're on the cusp of something that not just for biotech, but for literally anything. Like I think I read today, Microsoft is implementing AI search into Bing now. So AI is just about to change the world, just like Google did like 15 years ago, and became the search engine and the information hub. I think we're just about to see something like that with AI. And I don't think no one knows anything like exactly where it's going to go, except that it's going to change the way we do things. And I tell you, by this time next year, it would have really been a big part of our lives, the way I think I see things moving.
So on my end, it's already there, as you can imagine. So Synthago does thousands of sort of gene edits a day. And so as a result, we have a crap ton of data is the way to put it. And so we apply algorithms to that data set, for either when you're doing the specific gene delivery, when you're recovering the cells, et cetera, all of those things across different cell types, we can actually, apply AI to it longer term. And we can apply algorithms that search for success parameters of effectively what's now biology, because we're doing automation for a lot of the other pieces. Other jobs I've interviewed at for radiology, that's absolutely being used right now, right? So looking for aberrant tissue in images that are not being viewed by the eye of a doctor, but actually just being viewed by a system is applying AI. So they train using data sets and then they apply AI to it in order to identify the aberrant tissue to then be escalated to a radiologist. So yeah, there are pieces very much in biotech. I'm sure Julie also, I know BMS is very much automated. So I'm sure Julie also has some pieces there that people are working on. And so I think, we're in that world right now, which is pretty cool.
I think as Sharik said, it'll be a really fantastic tool for drug discovery. There's finding small molecules or kind of these new drugs are kind of spinning out into new companies, I think right now. And so it'll be time to see if AI will really be proven as a useful tool in that aspect. And then I think in drug development, we haven't quite figured out how to speed up things yet. It is, in cell therapy at least, it's still quite manual, but during kind of optimization and et cetera, where a lot of the work is automated, that's clearly a place where AI can be useful. And so I think automation and AI come hand in hand. And if you don't have automation, you can't really use AI to help. And so there is a hardware component to getting AI more useful.
Maybe I guess maybe as the only person here where my business, the product is not a product. The product that I have is people. We are a human capital business. We don't sell a product or any kind of platforms. We develop platforms for custom needs. But it's the people's brains that make us good at what we do. And so I just actually had a talk with my peer group of business owners, and it was all about AI and how it's going to change the world and blah, blah, blah. And then we sit around and talk about it. And the consensus opinion is, and you heard it from what everyone said just now, the final output from anything that AI does needs to eventually get looked at as a human. We are not going to get to the stage where a computer is going to say, we think this molecule is good for this disease, and it's just, they're going to spend billions researching it. There's going to be a human making that call before it happens. And so I think there's a level of the automated, that the manual labor, if you will, getting kind of expedited, but you want to be still the person. There's still going to be those roles. There will always be roles for the brain to come in and do the work. And so, I don't know if some people feel a little bit disheartened that it's kind of reducing the opportunities out there. It's not. It's just shifting the opportunities to a different place. And quite frankly, to more exciting places. Because you don't want to be doing the boring work.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good point to add, just because sometimes you'll hear AI and then fear. And so the importance of acknowledging, like, doesn't mean things are disappearing, they're just changing, they're evolving. Yeah, really good point. Okay. Oh, okay. Questions. All right. So what do you consider are some of the key factors that drive either the easy adoption or roadblocks the adoption of new technologies and tools in specialty healthcare? For example, contagious diseases, HIV. And then they added, for my above question, please also elaborate current design challenges, including user experience issues influencing adoption.
I'll start out by saying, so just speaking from a pharmaceutical standpoint, the biggest challenge to adoption of new therapies, drugs, is habit and cost, right? Those are the two biggest things that stop people from trying something new. If cost wasn't a factor, because they live in these constrained environments of public funding, et cetera, it creates a lot of barrier there. And just the habit of physicians who, that you're pumping through, everyone's busy and you're just trying to do the same thing. And it was good enough yesterday. So yeah, there's a new option, but probably what I was doing is still good enough today. So why should I make my life more difficult by trying to learn this new therapy that's going to take me longer, mean I can see less patients, mean I can, help less patients, bill for less patients, it all kind of links in. So those are the challenges I think that face pharma in getting new therapies uptaken.
Yeah, to build on that point, it is interesting how a lot of these adoption challenges are really just human, challenges. And so regardless of how great your data look or etc., you really need to, have that EQ component to be able to persuade someone to adopt a new technology or something. And so you have to be able to explain the pros of kind of changing the entire way that you're currently doing things and adopting something new. And so this happens at all levels, not just kind of even at the scientific level. Scientists are still human, and or people. And then you think data would speak, but there's still people component. And then on the doctor and patient side of things. So so it's interesting.
Just a couple of things to add over there. I mean, I think Daryl and Julie kind of covered most of it. It's obviously cost, and of course, something you're comfortable with. You got to think of it, at least from my perspective, in terms of medicine, right? I mean, medicine is directly impacting a human on the other side, right? This is not experimental anymore. So any change means you're going to deal with some sort of side effects that you did not, or that the previous drug, you kind of knew how to deal with a lot of things. But in terms of early adoption, I'd also say, like, flip the side to the other thing. And it's just, and I don't disagree with it. It's a safety component because you're dealing with people, right? I think in the question you mentioned COVID, right? I mean, if you listen to Moderna, they said it took us a weekend to make the COVID vaccine, right? It's not making the vaccine that was hard. It took like almost 1 year. And that's amazing speed, by the way, based on how things work, to actually get that vaccine into arms and get a trial to read out, right? So they had the product already ready. It's just that you have to go through a lot of, jump through a lot of hoops, and you kind of should have to, because, think about what the impact could be on the other side, right? And so many people would just be like, you know what, I know how to manage my patients on this. I am less comfortable with jumping through that. And the government's also thinking the same way, or whatever regulatory body is also in the same shoes, saying, I don't want you to hurt people if you don't have to, right?
Yeah, Grace, you're unmuted. I'm not sure if that's a legacy unmute or if you had something to say. No problem if it's not. I just wanted to make sure I got you covered. Okay. Okay, so there was a question that came in, another one came into my chat. So I'll do this question here first. Have you seen any career mobility of people with doctoral degrees, so biomedical research, but have been working in university administration, managing research consortia? So what are the top skills this cohort should highlight, develop to be able to transition to biotech?
Yeah, I mean, we've hired people from that. So absolutely, I'm sure Julie has also probably has a lot of experience here. I think you should highlight your kind of collaboration skills, your coordination skills, your ability to kind of manage different asks, align people, prioritize. I think a lot of those are what really help. Obviously, fundamentally, if you worked at the Allen Institute and you are going into neuroscience, that's obviously a key thing, or a company that's doing like neuroscience-based drug development or something, that's obviously a key thing as well. But I think a lot of it is just how you handled sort of the different asks that come through to you and how you prioritize and manage the success of that consortia to make sure that it achieved its goals and objectives, and how did you define those goals and objectives. So that kind of organization is what I've personally looked for when I've hired these folks into our R&D positions. You know, if you're looking for positions out of R&D, I think that's a little bit of a longer discussion, but I think you can do the same things. Those transferable soft skills is what you should probably play on, and say that you have a technical crutch that you can always lean back on.
I'll add to that, Grace, you said, you know, how you handle kind of the different asks that came to you, I think is also being able to demonstrate you going after some of those different challenges and sort of self-identifying them and taking them on. And sometimes it might mean it's outside of what your job is, right? So when you work in an academic or institution or whatever it might be, any institution, not just academic, there's your job and there's the objectives, but then there's the things you can take on. You could, I'm just saying, you could be on the health and safety committee. That's volunteer, right? But it's showing that you're going to take a lead and you're going to take charge of something across the company. You could be on the social committee. You could be on whatever. You could be the one who's going to form a new relationship with someone across the world. So I'm going to start trying to find out who are our partners around the world who we might want to start, you know, connecting with. But showing that you take on stuff like that, challenges that are not part of the job, but are adding to the overall goal of the organization, I think is differentiating, because it shows that what one is you can do it, but you also could identify what needed to get done, which becomes more and more important when you get into kind of the corporate world. Someone's not always telling you what you should do next. You got to figure it out.
True.
Big point.
And yeah, oh, sorry, just to add, I mean, there are specific roles where your job can be to connect from, you know, the company initiatives to various academic consortia. And so just being on the other side of that, in industry, it would be probably the first natural transition if that's a similar, if you wanted a similar role. But the whole aspect of connecting groups together and understanding how to speak to different groups of people, and forming some sort of structure around various initiatives is a skill set that not everyone has. And so what might come naturally to you doesn't necessarily comes naturally to everyone.
Right. So there was a question that came into me directly. Let me just, on my chat, I'm trying to look at all the technologies. This might be for Daryl. What are challenges you face as an entrepreneur, running your own company and starting your own company, something along those lines. And if anybody else wants to add to that answer too, but I think this one might have been directed at Daryl.
Yeah. So I guess, and I know we got the sneak peek at the questions that Yo-Yo was going to ask, and one of the questions that she might still ask later is, what are some of the biggest mistakes, you know, that we've made as we look back, and what would we have done differently? And so I'm going to look at that, because I never thought I wanted to be a business owner. I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I kind of, you know, it's not all it's chalked up to be. It's a 24/7 job. I can never turn off. I can never take vacation. Even when I'm on vacation, I'm on, because if I miss something, it doesn't just cost me. It costs my people. It costs my clients. It's hard, and so it takes a while to get used to that. But I think some of the challenges is knowing that or realizing that you don't know that it's for you or not for you unless you try it. And so, for example, I started with a company that was a startup. I was the fourth person in there. It grew to about 25, 30 people by the time I left. And then I came over to Medicom, which was about 6 people. And then it grew to about 12 or 15 people before I eventually bought it, and now own it. And it took about 8 years for that process at Medicom to happen. It took about 8 years for the founder to convince me. That was always his plan. That was his exit strategy. It was always his plan that I would buy, but I was like, no, I don't want to do this. That's not for me. And no, I just took an MBA. I don't know how to run a business. I just have the letters at the end of my name, but that doesn't mean I know anything. And I think the biggest challenge is that you truly have to trust yourself to figure it out. You're not always going to have to go somewhere to get the answer. There is no recipe to doing it, no matter what business. Even if there's like competitors out there, your situation is going to be different. And just feeling really comfortable to trust your gut and go with your gut and live with the consequences. Lucky for me, they've been mostly good consequences, but not always, right? And so that's the challenge. So it can feel a bit scary and lonely.
How do you navigate that challenge, the loneliness, the scariness?
Well, so I figured it out only recently, only in the last year. Like I said, I've joined a peer group of other business owners, not healthcare related. These are just business owners that do everything under the sun, insurance companies, manufacturing, and all of that, but we're all in the same geography. So we meet regularly. And it's just not feeling as alone, because you realize everyone's having the same issues, the same people issues, the same business issues, the same client issues, the same process issues, and whatnot. And so it's not you're not doing anything wrong. Every business is running into these things. Everyone's struggling to find the right answer. And then, of course, garnering ideas for the answers from them. So you don't have to come up with everything yourself. You can, we literally state our problems and people suggest solutions. So that's helped for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, normalizing the ups and the downs. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Entrepreneurship, startup? I see head shakes, head nods, head other direction shakes. Okay, there was a question that came in before I asked my questions that I interrupted. Where do you see the opportunities for growth in life sciences as an industry?
I'm assuming that means from like a therapeutic area standpoint, like which areas do we see growing?
Yeah, I would say answer as you see fit, but if the person who asked the question, if you want to add some more clarification, you're welcome to do so as well.
I can do from a tools perspective, which is where my expertise is. So I think protein sequencing is going to be the next big thing, with spatial like sort of genomics, if you will. So this whole concept of not just doing bulk understanding of your macromolecules in the cell, but actually doing it like at a single cell and then localizing where it is, or even in a tissue localizing where it is. So that's the whole concept of spatial, like things that 10x Genomics are doing. And there's a ton of competitors in that space right now for 10x. The other part is protein sequencing. So really what we did for DNA and RNA, doing that in protein is up and coming. There's about 5 companies that are sort of leading that charge right now. I think what, Julie's in, so this whole concept of cell and gene therapy, cell therapy, but also gene therapy, I think from a therapeutic perspective, it's really starting to grow and expand as well. And there's a lot of values there, and layering of other technologies, such as even just antibodies and stuff into that to help those therapies be better. I think that's growing as well. Those are sort of the 3 things that I see from, who we sell into and who our end users are at this time.
I think I'm pretty sure everyone's aware of this, but just the virtual delivery of healthcare in general in the life sciences industry. So it's been kind of a, I think I actually just read an article that the Ontario government is going to do something to get rid of faxes in our healthcare system. So right now, doctors still all fax each other.
Oh,
right?
wow.
That's the system. And it's because they all work on systems that don't talk to each other. So the one universal language they can use as a communication tool, because email doesn't work, because it'll just get lost,
Mm.
is fax machines. So they fax each other. I'm sure you've seen this when you see your doctor faxing the
Mhm.
pharmacy and, you know, faxing the specialist.
Yeah.
And they just came out and said they're going to try and get rid of that. I don't know what the solution is, but they have a plan. And so, but going to that, you know, what we learned over COVID and the virtual delivery of healthcare and how it works in so many areas. You don't need to go in and see your healthcare provider and expose yourself to the disease that's in the waiting room in order to get, you know, your cough looked at or something like that. Like, well, maybe they do, maybe they need to listen to you. I don't know. There's a bunch of things they don't need to see you in person for. But finding different ways. Can they listen to you, you know, the equivalent of a stethoscope through a virtual meeting? Is that possible? And how can they do that? How can they set that up? But that would solve so much in our healthcare system. And I think people's eyes opened up over COVID, and they're closing again now because the government's funding it less in terms of doctors aren't getting paid for virtual meetings as much. But I think that the door's still there for us to make a change, that we don't just go back to the way it was.
I just say I probably find it hard to answer that question in terms of like this is exactly where you need to go. I think every company will eventually reinvent itself and where the trend is going to take it. You know, like kind of speaking to what Daryl was saying, wearable tech. I mean, many people use Apple Watches and all sorts of things. You know, these are going to inform healthcare decisions ultimately, right? So, you know, virtual delivery obviously comes in. Grace said something that I used to actually work on, things like proteomics and, you know, high multiplex analyses and all this. But I'd say that, you know, overall, you know, I think of cancer, and it might be biased because, you know, I am in oncology, but, you know, until you cure it, right? Until you cure terminal cancer, you're always going to need research in there. And, you know, there's a lot of, you know, products coming out all the time, you know, with minimal gains sometimes, but, you know, small incremental increases. It's just improving, you know, outcomes. Something like Julie works in, she can tell you more about this, you know, CAR T cells, cell therapies, you know, being the revolution for certain types of cancer over the last 10, 15 years, because, you know, it's like a single dose and then you live the rest of your life. So, you know, we're transitioning more and more towards that, more and more towards biologics. So, you know, I think that, again, I'd go back to, you know, think about what you want to do. I'm sure that you can find, you know, none of our roles were stagnant. I bet you they changed over the last year and they'll continue to do so. So it's hard for me to sit down and say, you know, just go in this field and your next 30, 40 years of your life are set. Just understand that you'll always be reinventing yourself.
Yeah.
Personalized medicine would be another one.
Yeah.
So, you know, companies who are doing panels and tests that are, you know, identified, may not be a whole gene sequencing or whatever, but things that are going to determine whether you're the one who will react better to drug A versus drug B. You know, those companies are going to be more demand because they end up partnering with all the pharma companies who need their panels of tests.
Yeah.
But again, good point from Shark. Like, you can't just pick one and say that's where I want to be.
Okay. Go ahead. Julie, I saw you unmuting, but was that maybe not?
I think everyone spoke to it, but yeah, there's just a lot of interest. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I don't think you can go wrong with picking something.
Yeah. And there is, from what I've heard, the ability to also, you know, be agile and things like that, just from even your experiences that you've shared here. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. And one of the questions I was actually going to ask came in. Someone asked something similar, so I'm gonna stick with your question here, where it says, can the panel please share one or two major lessons learned from their industry and entrepreneurial experience? So one pro, one con, like wouldn't do it again.
So I guess I'll go first. One thing I would do again, now that I can look back and say, okay, it was all worth it, is not putting myself in a box. You know, I'm one of two, I have one brother, so we're one of two kids in the family, and my dad was an accountant, and my brother was always the math, well, I did well in math too, but anyway, he was always wanted to be an accountant and the finance guy, and I was always the science guy who wanted to be a doctor, like my uncle. And so that identity was kind of laid in my mind. Not that my parents forced it on me, I pretty much put it on myself. And then it took a long time when I finally got into the industry to say, oh, you know what? it's actually not the science that thrills me. I actually like kind of like, you know, the whole dealing with people and finding talent and developing careers and selling something and managing a cash flow and all of these things. Like that actually thrills me more because it feels like I'm contributing. You know, there's 30 people in my company who I've given them a career basically, and that's really rewarding to me. But it's completely throwing away 6 years of school. My undergrad and my master's in science are pretty meaningless now, you know, relative to what I do. But I think I'm glad I did that. It's just not putting yourself in a box and you just go where your passion takes you. So maybe that's harder if you've got all the way to PhD and then you're going to say, I don't want to be a part of science. Maybe it's a good thing I got out at the master's level. And then thing I would not do again. I think I mentioned it earlier. It's just, I guess it goes to my pro is don't waste time making that decision. I lost years. You know, I could have done okay for myself, but I could have been ahead if I hadn't kind of stalled and literally someone was there telling me, I think you can do this. And I was saying, whoa, I don't know if I can do it for sure. Let's just, you know, pump the brakes here. Now I look back and I'm like, that was just silly. So don't doubt yourself. Basically, I doubted myself. Yeah. If you've got an advocate, let that advocate drive you.
Right.
But I'll just say that one major lesson, and I think Daryl alluded to this, is everyone's path is unique. I've been on the other side of these panels. So, you know, I mean, it's very tempting to say that, you know, oh, I like what Grace does, and that's it. That's what I'm going to emulate now. That's not quite the way it works. I mean, I understand that your path will be unique. You may end up in the same place. You may end up somewhere else. Just understand that your path will be unique. Don't try to fit yourself into a box. I think that was said. And one something that I used to do, especially during my PhD days, that I hope I've gotten a little better with now, is knowledge is key and you should know what you're talking about, but always understand, for me as an MSL, I have to talk to oncologists or doctors, right? I can't just go up and regurgitate scientific information, right? I don't need to just throw numbers at them. I need to understand that if someone's meeting with me, what do they need from me? That's what the meeting's really about. I need to understand what it is that I can bring to them, not just assume that all they want is for me to read out this paper and throw it in their face right there and be like, oh, look at this clinical trial, everything met, this 50% here, blah, blah, blah. So it's a matter of know your stuff, but that doesn't mean that you have to say it all. Just be patient, listen to the person on the other side, and then try to piece together because less can be more. And that's one of those things that I've learned through time.
Great lesson. I'll let you go. I'll let you go next, Grace.
I think everything was really good that was said here. It's generally like advice, I guess. Sharik's thing was really good. Definitely listen, right? And that applies to everything, not just like speaking to external facing folks, but also internally. I think my one pro is I went to a startup as the first job out of my grad school. I think the con is I went to a startup for my first job out of grad school. So I think you learn a lot. I mean, that saying of you're drinking from a fire hose could not be more accurate. You really do drink from a fire hose. And so I think it gives you this ability to really be agile and navigate and potentially find what you love sooner. But at the same time, you kind of lose a little bit of yourself in all of it because, you know, I think back to my early days in Vancouver and I just didn't sleep. I was mostly in hotels, you know, shuttling between airports. I think at a point I was like, how long do I have to be in the country to remain a citizen? Is that a thing? Like, I was pretty worried about that for a while. I think in the end, it's kind of worth it. And so my answer is always like, there's no regrets in my life. But everybody's path is unique. I think Sharik said the same thing. So one of the things I hate about myself is I still do it, which is I look at other people's things and I say, oh, I should have just done it that way. You know, as Daryl's speaking, I'm like, yeah, why did I do a PhD? I should have just done an MBA, right? Like, so those thoughts will always be in your head. Don't let them consume you, right? Like it's okay to find examples elsewhere. but don't let them consume you, and find your own path as well and be happy with what you're doing. I think that my philosophy is always keep learning. And my first ever, person who hired me at Precision Nanosystems always told me to be the dumbest person in the room. And I think those are two things that I have held on to, and the PhD has taught me to do as well. And so that's kind of the advice I continue to pass forward to those who report to me and those I end up mentoring as well.
Yeah, really good advice. All right.
I guess I'll go last.
But not least.
I think what I've learned throughout my career is to trust my gut more. So I mean, as trained as a scientist, I always think with my brain, and data is always helpful. But I think there's been times in my career when I knew I was ready for something, but didn't pursue it, because I didn't think I had enough experience for that. And so, and then later when I, actually I'm in the role, then I'm already overqualified because I already know how to do it. And so it's been a learning experience to try to just, go that next step and do something that you're not quite ready for. Because then the flip side is that you get bored pretty quickly. And so, so that's been something I've learned throughout my career.
Thank you. That's really good. That's really good advice. And sometimes people feel like they need to be perfect before they can go on to the next thing, and you get there and not as challenging.
I will just add to that. And I thought Shark might have been going here when he was talking about, listening more, and not all, less is more, is we hire a lot of PhDs, we hire a lot of postdocs as well. Getting used to not being the foremost expert and having 100% of the information. So Shark, I know you do a ton of reading before you go in and talk to an oncologist, but sure as heck that oncologist still knows more than you, but you hold your own in that conversation, and you're comfortable being maybe not the expert, but being able to, fake it till you make it a little bit. And I think that's kind of what I find people who've been in school for a really long time have gotten straight A's the whole time, and, blah, blah, blah. They have trouble doing that and kind of adjusting to an imperfect world where you don't necessarily have 3 weeks to prepare for the meeting with that doctor. You got 3 hours. What do I need to read in 3 hours before I walk into this meeting so that I don't sound like an idiot? And knowing the right 80% to read up on. That's, I think, something to really get comfortable with. And it's okay. That's how the world gets by. It's okay. Not everyone's perfect at everything all the time.
Right.
Right.
We're all kind of just faking it, is what I'm hearing.
That's it. We're all making it through the best we can. Yeah.
I will steal Grace's, be the dumbest person in the room who
Yeah.
what your mentor told you. I like that saying.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
I like it. So we are at time. I do see someone's hand was raised, and I wanted to give us an opportunity maybe to just wrap up on that, if that's okay. So Carla, if you are able to have them unmute themselves, if they can just ask their question, and we will wrap up there.
Hi there. Just wanted to thank every one of you, especially Yo-Yo, for bringing this panel. I've been in many webinars from U of T continuing studies, but I have to say, till date, this has been the best. I mean, the panels that are here, the people that who have, were cherry-picked, I hope, were amazing, number one. They were very candid in what they were saying. And yes, I heard, fake it till you make it, but I mostly think that they are giving true opinion of what they do and what they like and what they don't like. And I really, really appreciated it. I just wanted to say a big thanks to each of you for taking the time to be here. And I'll hope I would be able to connect with each of you on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. What a great way to wrap that up.
Yeah, I know, perfect. She just did your job for you, Yo-Yo.
Perfect way to wrap it up. Yeah, so and as you've all heard, networking is an important aspect. So if you do want to add them on LinkedIn, things like that, please feel free to do so. I know that I'm not alone in saying that this has been very helpful and insightful for me. I don't have this background, so really good insight on my end. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. You asked really good questions. You asked really engaging questions. So I hope you are leaving here with lessons learned and lessons learned that can stretch you and move you around and wherever it is your career does take you. You're welcome to continue to sign on to the Blueprint portal to see what other events we have coming up and other panel sessions. And we will continue to update those. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much to our panelists, Daryl, Grace, Julie, Sharik. Really, really, really helpful information. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed your time.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Nice meeting all the panelists
Thank
too.
you.
Have
Yeah,
a lovely
nice
rest
meeting
of your
everyone. That was
day.
fun.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.